All right, let's do this. Peanut, if you're staying in the room, no talking. Hello, and welcome to the PhotoWork podcast, the talky and unpredictably touchy-feely version of my book, PhotoWork, 40 Photographers on Process and Practice. I am, as usual, for better or worse, Sasha Wolf, recording today from and in the future from the Bearsville Theater compound up in Woodstock, courtesy of Lizzie Van, who gave me space here. So I'm really grateful to Lizzie. Thank you so much. I love being here. And yet here, as usual, virtually with my friend and producer, a man too big for two names.
Words no one has ever spoken.
Michael Chauvin Dalton, everyone.
Woo!
So I have some really exciting news for
Yes.
our our listeners from now on. If you go to Aperture online to buy books, when you go to check out, there's a little place for a discount code, and if you put in PhotoWork 30, you will get 30% off all books with the exception of, something really rare or whatever. But basically, 30% off all books, including my book. So I think that's, yes. Yeah. I'm really happy about that for everyone. I mean, I'm going to take advantage of it.
I know. That's just what I was thinking. Like, well, I can use that, right?
Yeah, man. Absolutely.
Well, thank you, Aperture.
Yep. Thank you, Aperture. So, Michael, before I ask you how you are and what you thought of the episode, we'll just mention that today's episode is a conversation with the photographer Dannielle Bowman.
Yes. Well, first, let me say how I wish I could be up there with you in your new home office, home studio, and I'm looking forward to the day when we can do things like that.
Yep. It is my studio here is actually big enough for more than one person. It's very exciting, by virtue of the fact that it's not a closet. So
yeah, that's right.
There would be room for you, man with three names.
Oh, that would be great. Yes.
It would be great.
And the episode is great. There were a few things that really stood out to me. One is there was a conversation that builds upon something that Todd Heido said in a previous conversation about the kind of artificial nature of a semester and the idea that you come out with this sort of final work. Dannielle mentions that there was this experience she had as an undergrad where everyone was just trying to be a genius at all times and putting out work on the wall that was supposed to be finished. And it wasn't a great experience for her because she wanted to see the mistakes. She wanted to see the process, and not have this sort of pressure that everything had to be, this masterpiece on the wall.
Right. It was like you only saw other people's work when it was sort of at its most polished version rather than seeing everyone sort of go through the struggle.
Right. Exactly. And then, of course, you have a conversation about the 1619 project, but there is one moment when Dannielle reveals that when she was invited to participate in the project, she receives this email and she thinks that it's a scam.
Yeah, she was so surprised that she didn't believe it was real, which is fantastic. I had a similar thing happen to me many, many, many years ago. I had a short film that I was submitting to film festivals, and my producing partner did a lot of that for me. I didn't like to get sort of caught up in the emotional roller coaster of it, so I tried to stay out of it. And she submitted to Cannes. I'm sure she told me. I don't know. I had no memory of it.
Or she was shielding you, right?
Yeah, she may have been. But they called me. So the director, like the head guy, literally at the Cannes Film Festival in Cannes, called me on the phone to tell me that my film was accepted, was being nominated for the Palme d'Or in the short film category. And I absolutely thought it was a prank. I had been working on a television commercial. I'd been hired to pull footage for a television commercial that was being cobbled together using all Peter Sellers playing Inspector Clouseau in the Pink Panther movies. And I had been for like weeks just watching Pink Panther films and pulling together, cutting out all these sections to make this television commercial. And so for people who haven't seen the Pink Panther movies, Peter Sellers is doing this fake French accent.
Yeah,
that's hilarious. That's right. Yeah. That's the sort of joke of all the movies. And so I had that fake French accent totally seeped into my brain. And then when this guy called, I absolutely thought it was one of my friends pranking me. So I had absolutely no reaction. I was like, yeah, right, yeah. And it wasn't until sort of the very end of the conversation when he started talking about really specific things that I was like, oh my God, you have got to be kidding me. This is real. And then I had a huge reaction, although at that point I couldn't be like, oh my, I couldn't let him know. So I just sort of like started jumping up and down quietly to myself. And, but anyway, yeah,
that would have, by the way, that would have been an awesome prank had someone pulled that on you.
Amazing prank. Yes. Amazing prank. What's incredible is that this guy's genuine French accent in my head sounded completely fake. Like I was, so.
Boy, that could have also been one of your most embarrassing moments in your life's history.
Yes, totally. I mean, I do think there's something really great about like how you manage your expectations and stuff, and like keeping those things in check.
Yeah, what that really speaks to is the idea, having humility and feeling like when people recognize your work and you're still at a level where you're thinking, I'm not there yet, that's got to be amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's something also really beautiful about the way in which, humility and managing expectations doesn't have to, quash ambition, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is something I'm always sort of trying to tell artists. It's not moving the goalpost and sort of keeping your eye on making your work and not getting too caught up in the, sort of highs and lows doesn't mean that you can't be ambitious or that you're not going after these big achievements, right?
Right.
But I think it's wise to sort of, just be careful about that roller coaster ride because it can be very fraught, I think, in my experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And just on a last note, I think one of the most interesting parts of the conversation was the discussion you have about the ambiguity in Dannielle's work and the way she describes the kind of multiple perspectives that she's okay with people bringing to her work and even infusing that in her work, expecting
Absolutely.
it.
Yep, I agree. I love that conversation, and I think what she talks about is really, really important. And it's another thing that, I know all of us who do any sort of teaching or mentoring of young artists, this is a concept that we're trying to get them to understand the need for layers and subtext and complication in their work.
Mm-hmm.
And, what separates a piece of artwork from a postcard.
Yeah, you reveal a little inside baseball on that one, which I'll save for the show about, when you are looking at work.
Right. Yep. Well, great. Okay, so we will wrap up and get to the actual conversation. Michael, if you don't mind, please take it away.
My pleasure. And here's your conversation with Dannielle Bowman. And don't forget, PhotoWork 30 coupon code.
Dannielle Bowman, welcome to the podcast. I'm so happy to be speaking with you today.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
So I ask all my guests just to give listeners a little brief bio of how they got to where they are today, right this minute as you're talking to me. So if you could just tell us just a little bit about your journey, that would be awesome.
Sure. Well, I grew up in LA, Los Angeles, California, going to the movies a lot. And that became, I guess, an obsession with images and photography and film, video, So when it came time to go to college, I went to Cooper Union to study art, photo and video specifically. But at Cooper, you're not allowed to specify like that. So I was just studying art. And after Cooper Union, I worked in different ways in the photo industry. I worked as a digital tech. I worked for a photo agent. I did a lot of things around photography, but didn't take pictures for actually quite some time. And then once I realized that I was meant to be taking pictures and I was meant to be an artist, I decided to apply to grad school. And so I went to Yale for my MFA and graduated in 2018 and have been taking pictures and teaching and just kind of doing the thing ever since I graduated.
Okay, so I was not expecting you to say, because we've talked before, but we don't really know each other that well, so I didn't know this, but I did not expect you to say that after Cooper Union, there's a whole question there about how you wound up at Cooper Union, but we'll save that. But I didn't expect you to say that you stopped making pictures and then you figured out you were meant to be making pictures. But that's sort of incredible. Like, what happened? I mean, was there a moment of feeling disenchanted, or were you just burnt out? Well, I won't guess. Why don't you just go ahead and tell me?
I think I am a very practical person, and unfortunately, that practicality made it very hard for me to comprehend how to have a life as an artist. And so, and so it wound up manifesting as like, well, maybe I can get a job that is photo adjacent and be happy, but I was miserable. So it became clear after a few years of that just wasn't going to do it for me.
Yeah. So did you just actively miss making pictures, or? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I really do. I think I started to understand that the way that I move through the world is, as a person who's like always observing or looking at things or sort of looking at light or looking at how things look and trying to figure out what things mean. And that, I think the best way for me to channel all of those sort of questions is into making work. And when I wasn't doing that, I was really unhappy.
Yeah.
So I figured that out.
I listened to a interview you did with, is it Aaron Turner?
Yeah.
And you said in that interview that you felt like your work in undergrad was also just not good. I don't remember exactly how you put it, but basically that's what you were saying. And I just thought, I loved that you said that out loud. And I know so many photographers who feel that way. And I just thought it was just worth mentioning that everyone goes through these periods, and also that it can take a long time when you're young to really develop your sort of artistic voice and vision. And so it's important just to allow yourself to not be a genius from jump, right? I mean, I don't know. I just wanted to mention that because I think people sort of sometimes give up on themselves too quickly. I don't know if you ever felt that, but I think it's sometimes you just really need to hang in there and let things develop, right? I mean, it sounds like it sort of took you a while to sort of figure out exactly what kind of work you were meant to be making.
Oh, yeah. I think I'm still figuring it out. I will be the first person to say that I am really figuring it out still. I think it's important to let yourself not be a genius every day. It's like,
yes. I never really try and be a genius, thank God. So I'm off the hook. But
well, that's good. I mean, it's just so easy to put pressure on yourself. It's too easy to compare yourself to what other people are doing. It's too easy to be angry or, disappointed with yourself for not making something incredible, on an hourly basis. But that's just not how it works.
It doesn't. No. It really doesn't.
No. And unfortunately, within art schools and outside of art school, but I think within art school, there's so much emphasis on critique and there's so much emphasis on the final product. And a lot of the time, especially when you're young and especially at a school like Cooper, where you're surrounded by kids who are trying to be geniuses all the time. It gets confusing when all you see is the final thing that someone sticks up on the wall. You don't see all of the turmoil. You don't see all of the wrong turns. You don't see, all of the labor, manual, emotional, intellectual that goes into a work. You're just really seeing the end of it. And it's such it makes you, it's a misconception of all of the work that actually goes into the work.
Yep. No, that's a really good point. I want to connect that to Yale. But before we sort of get into the experience of going to Yale, which is, I think, pretty much widely considered one of the best MFA photo programs in the world. So I want to talk about that. But I do want to mention something that I think is very consequential, which is that you won the Aperture Portfolio Prize this year. It was announced, I think, in April, which is obviously, tricky timing and probably didn't get as much, fanfare as usually does. There's usually not a worldwide pandemic, but it's such a huge achievement. And so, first of all, I wanted to just say congratulations because, I know that it can have really huge implications. I work with an artist, Brian Skopmott, who won the Portfolio Prize many years ago, and it can really propel you. People in the industry, everyone's aware of that, that prize. So I did want to ask you, what did that feel like, and how has it changed things, if it has at all, or what are your expectations?
I mean, it felt amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. Yeah, it's incredible. Yeah, it was great. I was surprised, I guess. I don't know. I worked really hard on that work. And I guess speaking of all of the back end labor that goes into making work. Yeah, I mean, I think only in the past couple years of my own making things have I been able to really have time to sit with the process. In grad school and in school, things happen a lot faster. Outside of school, you really have time to be uncomfortable with the lack of genius on the daily basis. Yeah. And that work that I applied to the Portfolio Prize with was really one of the first times in my life, I think, that I, if you want to call it an opportunity, had the opportunity to sit with that discomfort of making. So winning the prize obviously felt really great, especially after really sort of wrestling with myself while making that work. And I'm still making it. It's ongoing, and maybe it'll be one of those things that I stop and start. I don't know how long it'll take me to feel like I don't need to add anything else to it. But yeah, it was really a wonderful sort of, I guess, acknowledgement of everything that went into the work, I suppose. I don't know if that sounds weird or something, but...
No, it sounds great. I love how it's just... No, I feel like I'm just so grateful when I talk to people and they're really honest. Do you want to just tell people which body of work you're talking about?
Yeah. So right now it's called What Had Happened. I had a show at Baxter St Camera Club of New York in January of 2020, and I showed this work, the first iteration of this work, in that show, and that was what I named the show. So I'm sticking with that for now.
So let's just get into it, because I really want to talk about this work and your work in general, because your work, I would say, tell me if you don't agree with this. You can hang up on me, but I feel like your work is definitely on the more opaque side in terms of what I think it's about. And let me just say that I even wrestle with this idea of what that means. What does it mean what something is about? I even think that's a whole sort of dog chasing tail thing. But just for the sake of trying to speak plainly, I think that I would put your work in that category of work where the viewer really is likely to miss a lot of what the artist's statement is, or what your statement says about the work, that may not all get, and in fact, most of it, or at least, I don't know, we'll start guessing percentages here, but a certain amount of that will not get to the viewer. And my understanding is that you're okay with that. And whether you are or you're not, I'd like to hear, but I'm interested in just what does that mean? Like, what is the right amount of understanding? And, obviously we want viewers to bring their own, life experience and feelings and emotions and take all that and then have that be a reinterpretation of the work. That's obvious. That's what art is. But certainly your work falls on the spectrum of, I'll just stick with the word opaque for now. Does that sound right to you?
Yeah, I think I definitely am interested in making work that is a little bit more opaque, maybe a little bit more obtuse even is a word that I like to use to describe it. And that desire is entirely based on my own experience as a viewer and with other work, and noticing the work that I'm most interested in and the work that versus the work that I quickly lose interest with. Like, I am interested and usually prefer work that I would also kind of categorize as maybe a little bit harder to read. I really enjoy being asked to do medium to heavy lifting. I don't want to come to work and have it just all be there, because I don't have to do anything. Like, why should I even look? If you've already done all the work for me, then why am I just don't know. I much more enjoy needing to do some of that work as a viewer. And so the kind of work that I have most enjoyed making is work that I think also asks people to do that.
And we're talking about concepts, really, because, your work is not, in and of itself, each photograph is not literally difficult to understand. You see, they're very descriptive. You make large format, extremely formal black and white photographs. So it's not like it's difficult. You and I are going to look at a photograph of yours and we both see the same descriptive properties and information there in the photograph. So it's really, we're really talking about, sure, individual photographs for sure. I mean, obviously some of your individual photographs are more obtuse, to use your word, than others. But particularly when we start putting it together as a body, right? I mean, does that sound right?
Yeah. I mean, I guess another thing that is important to me is that there can be a lot of different meanings coming out of the work. Like, I hope that when you come to it and then maybe leave and come back to it, you can come to a different conclusion, or maybe you can pick up something that you didn't necessarily pick up before. And I think having the pictures not be so legible or so available from the jump encourages a kind of revisiting and a re-looking and a rethinking and a re-evaluating, not only about what the pictures are doing, but about what we assume the pictures to be doing based on our own baggage as viewers.
And is there room in that for the pictures to be emotional as well, at the very least for you? I don't know about the viewer. I mean, each viewer, it's going to be different, but is there room in that for you when you're making and editing to feel that these pictures have a certain amount of emotion in them? Or are you really sort of coming down on the side of sort of more intellectual engagement with the actual individual pictures?
I think both are important. I think in the work that I made in grad school, part of what I thought was lacking after making that work was a lack of emotion, or a lack of, like, I wanted the pictures to feel more visceral, and noticing those two things missing were kind of what led me to make the What Had Happened work. For me, some of those pictures, like there's a picture of the back of a woman in her in her garden, in her backyard.
Yep.
That's called Vision Bump
Wonderful
and Curl.
photograph.
Thank you. That picture is very emotional for me. And then there's another picture, maybe one of the pictures of the backyard, Inglewood. Those pictures are very emotional. I mean, those pictures all are pretty emotional for me because I think they are, if not based on memories, they're based on, this might sound crazy, but they're based on visions that I feel like I have when I try to think of certain people. And in a lot of ways that work, because it is like revealing these memories or these sort of visual ideas that I have about these people in these places, it feels like very intimate. So it's funny, or not funny, but it's interesting to me that the work comes off as being so intellectual when for me, I think there is a lot of the work feels very intimate.
I definitely, just as a viewer of the work, it does feel more intimate to me than Here Now. Mm-hmm. So I think if that's the idea, then it certainly feels that way to me. Mm. And I feel that emotion in the work. I think your work is incredibly beautiful. I wanted to talk to you because I was very moved by your work. Mm. And, there's also, I think, a certain amount of like Robert Adams in your work, and I love Adams. And I'm sort of a perfect audience for your work because it's the type of work I love. And I actually wanted to ask you, just digress a little bit here into just a couple pictures that our listeners are going to have to go Google, but I'm just dying to know that you have a couple images. One is called SAP 2019, and the other is Untitled Diptych Crack 2019. And I felt so much Harry Callahan in those pictures, but is that just me because I love Harry Callahan, or?
Well, I love Harry Callahan too, and it's funny that you mentioned him because I liked him a lot when I first started taking pictures as like a teenager. I was really into his work, and I revisited it recently, having forgotten about it. And I was like, oh yeah, these are great. So it's funny that you mentioned him because I don't think he was at the top of mind when I made this work, but that doesn't mean he wasn't in there somewhere,
Oh, I think he was in there. Forgive me for being so pushy, but I think he was in there. And I actually think that's really interesting because, obviously I did not know what you just said. And, so I would say but that's so interesting about influence, because if he was someone who you really were interested in and liked or loved when you were a teenager, that's sort of probably when you were really coming to photography, then that influence probably settled in, and that's what influence does. Mm-hmm. So, one thing that I haven't asked you yet, and I probably should have earlier, but, can you just describe this body of work we've just been talking about for the past few minutes? Can you just describe what it is, what it means to you?
So I guess in like a very basic way, they are 4x5 photographs, scanned, inkjet prints. And in terms of this...
interesting.
Yes.
Very interesting.
Yes.
Okay, we'll come back to that. Go on. Sorry.
Yeah, and I don't make the prints, so there's that too. Just FYI. Cat's out of the bag. Sorry.
What?
Yeah, well, I can't.
As long as they're good, that's all that matters.
But the pictures themselves are... Well, the subject matter varies. The subject matter, there are some images that maybe you could call portraiture. I would say that they were portraiture adjacent because I guess going back to our conversation about the work not being so legible, as a photographer, as an artist, it is very interesting and fun for me to try to figure out how to upend conventions or hangups that I have around certain ways of photographing. So like, I hesitate to call them portraits because I think I am more interested in making something that is like kind of like a portrait, but not quite a portrait. And the same thing goes for like a kind of landscape or landscape pictures, like the sap picture that you mentioned and the diptych crack picture. Those are both my version of landscape, which I think is not necessarily what one might think of when they think of a landscape picture, but that's one way that I think about landscape. So the work itself, or the group of pictures themselves, are featuring different things. And then I guess as a whole, the work was inspired by my thinking about the Great Migration and I guess my family's history. My maternal grandfather moved from Denton, Texas to Los Angeles as like a 12-year-old in the 50s. And my maternal grandmother also moved from Texas to Michigan, actually, I think, and then to LA at some point in the 50s. And they met and married in LA and had my mom, and, here I am. And for anyone who doesn't know, the Great Migration, I guess the sort of quick version is that the Great Migration was a period during the 20th century from around, the 19-teens till the 1980s, early 80s, during which roughly 6 million Black Americans moved out of the South to the North, to the West, to the Midwest, just out of the South. And so I had always been really interested in that history, but I had also always thought it was just my interest in my own family. I think people are interested in their own families. I think a lot of artists make work not necessarily about the family, but their families. Obviously, Larry Sultan comes to mind and Pictures from Home comes to mind. And then there wouldn't be like a huge sort of a gold rush in the self genealogy field. Like, obviously, this is something that people are interested in broadly. And so I had never really considered my own interest in my family and their sort of piece in the Great Migration. I never thought of it as intellectual material for my work until a couple years ago when I read this book called The Warmth of Other Suns by Isabel Wilkerson. And reading her description of the Great Migration in the way that she does it, which is via 4 individual stories, and then sort of bouncing between these stories, and then bouncing, between those stories and the larger sort of scope of the story, that made me realize that it was bigger than just my family, obviously. And it really took hold of me. And, after making that grad school work, I really wanted to make work that felt more personal, but was still kind of rooted in history and in thinking about different stories from the past that are not as focused on as other stories. And so that's how I started making the work. I don't think the work is about the Great Migration. I think it's a very important thing to say, an important distinction to make, but it's really inspired by that.
So that's sort of the difference between sort of authors, and by author, I mean you, a creator, your sort of personal parameters and motivation for something and what the viewer may get from it. I mean, that's actually really sort of coming back around to what we were talking about earlier. That sort of, it's not a disconnect. It's just sort of like it's like the river starts flowing. I don't know, somehow I always come up with river metaphors, but it's like the river starts flowing at one point, and that's your sort of motivation to do something. And by the time it gets to the viewer, it's sort of downriver somewhat, and it's sort of separated to a certain extent, right, from that sort of very personal motivation. So you don't have that expectation for the viewer to connect to it in that exact way, unless they're reading the text that you wrote or Leslie Martin wrote about it or whoever wrote about it. No, it's really, it's sort of really interesting that Isabel Wilkerson's amazing, by the way. I just feel like I have to acknowledge that. I just read Cast.
Oh, I have it. I haven't read it yet. She's great.
Oh my God. She's
so
an amazing
awesome.
writer.
She's so badass.
Yeah. Holy cow. One thing I'm really, I don't know how, speaking of honesty, how, I mean, maybe everything was great, whatever, and that's what you'll say, and that's what it is. But I really am curious about the Yale experience, because I've worked over the years with many artists who were Yale MFA grads, and it seems to me that it is like the single biggest leg up. It's like it's both an incredible education, but it also seems like just unbelievable networking. Once you're in that sort of club, there are a lot of doors open for you. And yeah, so I'm really interested in what the Yale experience was like for you. I know you won the Richard Benson Award there, so which is fantastic. And maybe this also sort of get us over to some other really wonderful achievements. This is like the Dannielle Bowman Achievement Awards podcast. But you also were commissioned to make photographs for the 1619 project for the New York Times, which is really just must have been mind-blowing. But anyway, let's start with Yale. Maybe you just tell us a bit about what it was like going through that program.
Okay. Well, I have a request because I will talk about that, but I kind of want to respond to the very last thing that you mentioned about your river metaphor, because I think it's really interesting.
Yeah, sure.
If that's okay.
Do it.
I guess I like that. And maybe, I don't know if I said this before or not when we were talking about the legibility or the opacity of the work, but it's not important to me that people necessarily know that it was inspired by the Great Migration. But that's because I think that there's so much else happening in the work that there is a lot that you can, and maybe this is just me patting myself on the back. If it is, please let me know. But I think that there are so many other things happening in that work that, ideally for me, people will get drawn in through whatever they get drawn in through, whether it's the formal stuff, whether it's, anything else, the subject matter, like the obvious subject matter. Some people might be more drawn to the figurative. Some people might be more drawn to the more abstract. But I think that there's a lot to dig into in that work, like ideas about family, ideas about home, ideas about domesticity, ideas about urban design and the way that cities are set up, and ideas about memory and time, and light and shadow, that because of all of those other things that are working and that are present and that are important to me, I think that's why it's not necessarily so important that people be able to see the pictures without any sort of writing or guidance from me, and just sort of see them and not necessarily be like, oh yeah, these are about the Great Migration, because they're not really about that. They're just inspired by that.
Alejandro Cartagena, in my book PhotoWork, he talks about what you just described as layers. As sort of like, if you build up enough layers, then there's going to be an entry point for almost everyone. And they just may be completely different from person to person. But if you put enough layers in, there should be, it should work out. There should be something for almost everyone looking at it. I love that idea. It's like, and the way you describe it, it's almost like little Easter eggs. But, I sort of love that idea. And by the way, I completely agree with it. And let me just say that, if I'm working with a client and let's say they're, looking at two different images by one of my artists, and they're really torn between the two. And they ask my advice, which they should choose, and if I can't get them to buy both, then I'll always push someone toward the image that has more layers, because I don't want a client to ever put a print by one of my artists, something that I sold to them, up on their wall, and then realize in 6 months or a year, 2 years, or even 5 years that it's not still giving to them.
Totally. Yeah, that's so important.
So, I will always try and steer people away from, maybe the shinier image. But yeah, the more important image is the more complex image. I know I'm not saying anything particularly profound here, but I'm completely with you. And, I think that complexity is really important to having a long engagement. And as someone like me, I live with tons of photography all over my house. And it's really moving to me how at different points in my life, the work means different things to me. But I have the work that I have is, that I own is really strong work. And so it has that complexity. So whether I'm going through a difficult time or a more joyful time, or, there's ways to interact with the work because it does have those layers.
That's so important to me because I just, it's a shame to come to something and just sort of be able to think like, oh yeah, I know what's going on here. Like that really is not, that's bad. And I just, it's important for me, for my work to not, I don't know. I mean, I'm saying this now, who knows what I'll be doing in a year or 2 years, but I'm pretty certain that I'm way more invested in the complicated and the complex than anything else because of what you're describing.
Yeah, no, it's really beautiful to have these lifelong, whatever lifelong means, however many years that is, but to have these long ongoing relationships, with artwork. I mean, it's just one of the most beautiful things in the world, I think. So pivoting here, you made a number of photographs for the New York Times 1619 project, including, if I'm correct, the cover image for the magazine. So can you talk about that? It must have been an incredible experience.
Well, getting asked to do it was crazy.
Yeah.
I will never forget. It was the day after my birthday last summer, and I was getting ready to go to my birthday party, and I was late because I got this email from Jessica Dimson, who is wonderful. I think she's the deputy photo director at the New York Times Magazine, and she was, she said, hi, we're working on this thing. Nicole Hannah-Jones is spearheading it, and we love your work, and we thought of you for this, and would you be interested? And I just remember thinking, like, is this a scam? Like, is this a real? I don't know that this is real. And I was like, no, this is totally real. This is amazing. So I emailed her back, and we had a phone conversation. And yeah, and I think they sent me out because it was all traveling. It was a lot of traveling. I think they sent me out like the following week or maybe 2 weeks later. I went on my first trip out to work on that. So yeah, that was my first editorial assignment. So really,
how did they know of you? How did they know your work?
Well, in October of 2018, at the encouragement, another photo editor who I met through the Woodstock CPW residency. I did that residency in the summer of 2018, and I met.
Yeah, Chris Graves is here right now in that.
It's a great residency. It's a great residency.
I was with him yesterday over at the house.
That's that house is it's old.
Yeah, it is old.
There are some old houses up there, but I met a photo editor through that residency, and he's awesome. And I told him I was curious about doing editorial work, but I wasn't really sure how to go about it. And he was like, oh, you should email these people. Just email them your portfolio. Because I spent a little bit of time between undergrad and grad school working for a photo agent, I am no stranger to cold calling or cold emailing people. I have no shame. I will do it.
Good.
And that's
great.
Yeah. Well, when I worked for the agent and she would be like, well, just call this person. And I would say, well, do you know them? And she'd say, no, just call them and ask and try to get this photographer we represent a meeting. And I was sort of like, okay. So that experience really kind of showed me that even people who have representation is still doing the cold calling and emailing for you. Yeah, they might know some editors, but they don't know everybody. So that October, I cold emailed a bunch of editors, including Kathy Ryan, and she had actually visited Yale for a lecture while I was there. And Yale is one of the reasons Yale is great is because all of these wonderful people will come all the way up to New Haven from wherever, from New York, to have studio visits and give talks. And I didn't have a studio visit with Kathy Ryan that day, but I saw her talk. And so when I emailed her, I'd mentioned that I had seen her talk, and she responded actually to my first email and said, thanks for your interest. And, it was very nice. Then I didn't hear anything, which I think is pretty typical. And then like 9 months later, I get this email about 1619. So yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I just want to sort of do an audio version of taking my highlighter pen and just highlighting a few things here for listeners, because I know because I hear from them, which is absolutely lovely. I know we have a lot of listeners who are in undergrad and in grad school or just starting out and trying to navigate their way. So I think it's worth just sort of emphasizing some of the things you just said. First of all, I just want to say that Kathy Ryan is the head photo editor of the New York Times Magazine, and she's sort of a real icon in our world and has just done incredible work for the New York Times Magazine and hires a lot of fine artists to shoot in their style. You know, I work with a lot of them, so and or they're friends of mine. So whether it's, you know, from Eleanor Carucci, Matthew Pillsbury, I mean, I know Julian Laub does work, and Brian Skutmott, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's a really wonderful thing to be connected with Kathy. But so cold calling, okay. Networking, unbelievably important. Mm-hmm. The personal, which is that you didn't remind Kathy, but you mentioned to Kathy that you had been there when she spoke up at Yale. So just that sort of, you know, making it clear you're not like a complete stranger. Mm-hmm. And maybe that sounds discouraging for people listening who, you know, can't use that connection. But I would just say that anything you can sort of use to just sort of assure someone that you're writing to, or that you're asking for something from someone who's sort of a stranger, the more you can sort of envelop it in some sort of familiar. I mean, I know when people write to me who I don't know, who want me to look at their work, that, you know, even just saying something like, you know, Sasha, I really love your roster. I particularly love this artist or that artist, makes me feel like, you know, you're not just cutting and pasting. And so, you know, these things we're all human beings, right? And why shouldn't someone respond if you write them a nice email? Obviously, people get inundated and they can't reply to everything. But as many people out in the world can testify to this fact, I respond to almost every email I get from a stranger, as long as it, like I said, doesn't seem like someone just cut and pasted, you know, something they've been sending to everyone. I mean, you know, and I appreciate when someone puts in the effort, and so I put in some effort back. But it's really worth it to just get out there and hustle, right? And this paid off for you in such a huge, incredible way. And yeah, and just congratulations. It's just, it's so great.
Thank you.
So what did it feel like doing the work? I mean, you know, obviously there's probably some personal connection, family history, and the legacy of slavery. And what was it? How did it feel doing the work?
Yeah, it was pretty intense. It was very intense. But as I was doing it, I did not really give myself the room to be probably as to be as emotional about it as I may have wanted to. I don't really think I gave myself an opportunity to feel the intense emotions that I did end up feeling until I was like not on the road. Because you know, there's the pressure, there's always the pressure of just trying to do a good job. Like, you got to get the picture. You've got to get the picture, especially when it comes to editorial work. You know, you have to deliver something. So you have to get from point A to point B. And I think I really focused a lot of my attention towards trying to figure out how to photograph the places that they sent me to, especially because many of those locations are not easy to photograph. And many of the locations were not places that I would inherently be attracted to photographing. And, you know, for anyone who's seen it, and you'll know, it's photographs of fields. It's like an intersection somewhere with a statue. It's a building somewhere. So it was hard to figure out how to approach the work photographically. But then I think there was also a lot of emotional labor that I was having to do while working on it, I've definitely never thought so much about slavery and the legacy of slavery and how that legacy is apparent in our everyday life. I had never really sort of time traveled in that way before when thinking about that. And I'm really grateful to have been given the opportunity to work on that project because it changed the way that I think about everything. It changed the way that I make my own work, I think. It was just kind of a wonderful opportunity. It was exhausting also. Like the manual labor of it, of traveling, of getting to the places. I didn't work with an assistant, so like having to watch my back in places that I am very unfamiliar with. That was the most time I had ever spent in the South. And so being in such a different place was something that I had to navigate also. And that's not to say that like the North or the West are like, Edenic. Like I'm not, I definitely don't have I'm not confused about what the world is. Certainly not. But, being in an unfamiliar place alone and trying to focus on getting a picture, it was a lot. So it was
I would assume, I'm sorry, forgive me for, okay. and also forgive me if I'm about to now, psychoanalyze you in a way that's completely off base, but I would assume that it would also probably feel scary because you're sort of having to conjure up not memories, but imaginings of one of the worst times, if not the worst time in American history, which is the beginning of slavery. So, those early years. And so I can imagine that, it would make you feel even more sort of uneasy because your headspace is must have been in a very painful and scary time, right? I mean, does that sound right? Or
yeah, I mean, I think painful is a correct word. Yeah, I don't know. I hesitate. Scary, I hesitate. But I do think because it feels, I don't know, so much bigger than that. Like it's so, so vast. It is such a vast, deep pain. And it was very intense. And I really kind of had to be pretty, I don't know, boundaried with what I was letting myself feel because of wanting to do justice to the work. Yeah, it was a very sort of, it was very intense. That's the word that I always use to describe it, is intense.
Well, before we wrap up, I just want to go back to something we mentioned but didn't get a chance to discuss, which is your experience at Yale, because I do think that the Yale MFA has a sort of outsized, influence in the photo fine art world. So I thought it'd be just really wonderful to hear from you what your experience was like there.
Yeah. For me, it was really important. I think partly because kind of as we talked about before, I had taken some time off of taking pictures and I had taken some time away from my practice. So it was the decision to go to grad school and the decision to go to Yale and then going were important ways for me to reconnect and figure out what I actually cared about with my work. But then on, I guess, a sort of more community level, it was so important to meet the people that I met. And I'm not, obviously the networking is one aspect of it, but I think more importantly, my cohort, and then in particular, there's a few people who I became so close with, I'm still really close with, and some faculty who I'm still really close with, who to this day, I will, if I'm working on something, I'll take a picture with my phone and text it to them and say, is this trash? Or does this do anything? Or is this too green? So that network of peers, I don't know. I feel so grateful. And then, as you say, Yale photo and Yale art, I guess in general, does have this outsized reputation. And it's such this it's such a myth. It's such a I don't know, from the outside, I think it becomes a caricature of what it actually is. And you're so excited and you're getting ready to go and you kind of don't know what to expect from other people, if people are going to want to flex like all the time or not. And then you get there and you realize it's just another place, just like anywhere else. There are computers that sometimes don't work. There are people with personalities. It just happens to be this kind of, I don't know, photo sort of heaven in some ways, or hell. I guess it depends on who you ask. But for me, it was important to like meet other people who I felt like I could really connect with about personal stuff, but also about the work. And it was important to have that time to focus on my work.
And is there, I mean, I don't, if you don't feel comfortable saying, that's absolutely fine, but I'm a curious person. Just wondering if there, or who were the teachers you felt sort of the most connection to, and this could either be personally or as far as work goes.
Well, A.L. Steiner started teaching, I think she was on the panel, I think from my first semester on, but then she was an official faculty member, I think, in the first semester of my second year. She's an amazing artist. She's an amazing teacher. An amazing mentor. She's really generous, and I'm still in touch with her. I think John Pilson is awesome, and always has you always look forward to what he has to say. And then everyone else, like I think it can be very easy to be very critical of our teachers when we are students, and I think it can be hard to remember that they are also people, especially now that I'm a teacher myself. It's like, I sort of see all of the things in myself that I would probably have criticized in other people. So I guess I don't know, like I appreciate their labor, I guess I will say.
Right. Yeah.
And then some of the, the critics that would come were amazing. Sandra Perry is amazing. Dina Lawson, an awesome critic, a really brilliant artist, obviously, and just gives great feedback. Lots and lots of people. Leslie Hewitt, El Perez. Yeah, great people.
Well, Dannielle, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I know there's more things for us to talk about, but we'll have to pick it up another time. But I really appreciate talking with you, and
thank you.
Can't wait until there are more things in person, and I can come see your prints in person and try and figure out why you're not making silver prints. But I'm such a print snob.
Yeah.
I know.
No kidding.
It's horrible. That, by the way, that's like just completely betrays my age. That's what really is going on there. But anyway, no, thank you so much, and be well.
Thank you. You too.
Until next time.
Okay.
Bye. Take care.
PhotoWork with Sasha Wolf is produced by me, Michael Chauvin-Dalton of Real Photo Show. The executive producer is Sasha Wolf, and our theme music is by J. Walter Hawks. You can hear PhotoWork on all your favorite podcast platforms. Please rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or Spotify, and be sure to subscribe on any one of those services or wherever you listen to podcasts.